This is my 1996 LX450 that I bought on Facebook Marketplace. And if you're new around here, I've been slowly fixing this thing up and getting it back on the road. And in the last video, after sorting out some issues, I was able to take this thing for its first real test drive. But that's when we discovered a leak that was very concerning and could potentially ruin this project. Right there is where I left everybody in the last video on the cliffhanger, and I know I did you kind of dirty on that one, but I had to get you back to the next video somehow. So without further ado, I'm going to pop this inspection port off on the bell housing, and we're going to see if our rear main seal is actually bad. Now looking inside of this bell housing here, you can see the flywheel is completely dry. Everything inside of here is dry, so that gives us a pretty good sign that our rear main seal is not the problem of this leak. I was already shopping transmission jacks whenever I saw this leak, but with pretty good confidence I can say that our rear main seal is not the problem. And finding out that this rear main seal wasn't a problem was great news, but it also left us at a crossroad of this project. If I was being responsible, this is probably where you track down the oil leak, give the engine a full tune-up, change the oil, and knock out all the boring maintenance that a nearly 30-year-old Land Cruiser probably deserves and needs. And normally I have a pretty simple rule with project cars. You don't get to do any of the fun stuff until the boring stuff is done. But there's one small problem with that. I've got about $5,000 worth of parts that have been taking over my garage for the last couple months, and it's driving me crazy. I can't even open the doors on this thing anymore. So for once, we're going to completely ignore my own rule, because it's finally time to start turning this old LX450 into the Land Cruiser I've pictured in my head since the day I bought it. So now, let's start revealing what exactly that pile of $5,000 was. The first thing going on this LX450 is going to be a set of Toyo Open Country AT3 tires. And the size on these are 285/75 R16, which comes out to be right at a 33-inch tire. I've always thought tires can completely change the personality of a vehicle. You can take the exact same truck or car, change nothing but the tires, and suddenly it looks like it was built for an entirely different purpose. And with this LX450, I really didn't want to go too far in either direction. I want this thing to be capable off-road, but I also don't want to lose what makes it an LX450 in the first place. It's basically a Land Cruiser in a suit, and I still want it to have that classy look. That's why I went with these Toyo Open Country AT3s. They've got enough of an aggressive tread and sidewall to completely change the stance of this truck, but they're not so aggressive that it starts looking like a dedicated trail rig, maybe like some mud terrains would do to it. To me, they're kind of the perfect middle ground for this build, something that'll look just as good driving around town as it does covered in mud on a trail. And the next day I got all these tires loaded up in the back of the truck and took them to get mounted and balanced. And about $100 and an hour later, it was time to finally get these things unloaded and mounted on the LX450. And I was able to get these old tires posted up on Facebook and ended up selling them for $160. Now, let's see just how different this truck looks with some new tires. For this next mod, we needed to pull this thing into the garage. Okay, yeah, this is probably enough to give away what the next mod is. So I'll save you the time. Yeah, I took the front bumper off. Can't get anything past you guys. So I guess I'll go ahead with the next mod, geez. And the next mod going on this LX450 is nothing less than the ARB Deluxe front bumper. And these have kind of become a staple in the 80 series community. And in my opinion, I think it makes sense. As expensive as these bumpers are, you can't deny the ARB build quality. And I think these things are the best looking front bumper on an 80 series. And obviously, we're not going to slap a front bumper on this thing without a winch. And for the winch of choice, we've gone with the Badland Apex 12,000 pound winch. And say what you will just because this thing comes from Harbor Freight, but I really think these things have been tried and tested. And now the first step to getting all this stuff on the 80 series is to prep this front bumper for installation. And all that really consisted of was installing the 2 turn signal markers on the bumper, and then obviously getting this winch mounted to it. And while I'm unboxing this winch here, I want to circle back to the decision of this Apex winch. Like I said, I think these things have been tried and tested, and nobody can deny the price on these. For $600, you're getting a winch with a wireless controller out of the box, and this thing's already spooled with synthetic rope. And that makes it really hard to pass up on. So as of right now, I stand by my decision, but we'll see if that changes as time goes on. And to run this Badlands winch on this specific ARB bumper, you will need a winch spacer kit. And I just went ahead and bit the bullet on the $80 one offered from ARB. And around front here, we did need one more add-on to make this winch compatible with the bumper. And that was an aftermarket Fairlead. I went with a Fairlead from Factor 55 that had the offset we needed to get this line off the bottom part of that bumper. And then it was just a matter of getting an extra hand to lift this thing up onto the truck. And then the next day, all I did was put this Fairlead on the front right here. And I have to say, even if it wasn't necessary, I may have still opted for this Fairlead because that gunmetal gray looks way too good. And then the very last step was just installing the hook right here. Now we got the tires, we got the bumper, we got the winch, and all this stuff is great for trails, but only trails during the daytime. So naturally, the next mod going on this LX450 is going to be some off-road lights. And a big thank you to Auxbeam for sending out a pair of their new Explorer 1 lights. And this isn't sponsored by them or anything like that, they just reached out and wanted to support the build and sent over a pair of these lights. And we opted for the amber version here just for better through dust and fog, that kind of thing. So again, big thank you to the guys over there, and I'll also leave a link to these lights in the description. And I've been really happy with these so far. I've been using them for a while. These things are really solid, and I think they look great too. So, and don't worry, we'll be able to see actually how bright these things are on trails at the end of the video. Man, and I just gotta say, I love the look of this front end. We got that gunmetal gray on the Fairlead, also matching the hook on the winch. And then just the black of the car, the bumper, and then you just have these 2 amber pod lights just popping. And now we just need a good way to control these new pod lights. And to do that is gonna be the Auxbeam 6-gang switch. And to mount this thing up neatly, I'm going to be going with the Red Creations mount that he 3D prints, and I'll put a link down there to his Etsy page in the description. And now we have a whole bunch of wiring ahead of us, and I intentionally did not wire up anything that we previously installed. I wanted to get everything done at the same time so I could do it as neatly as possible. And then I'm going to start it off with the easiest of them all, just the 2 turn signals here on the bumper. And this one is as easy as tapping into the left and right turn signals and just running them to the wires down here. Now let's go ahead and move on to wiring up the winch. And I did need to relocate the control box on the winch to make it fit on this Land Cruiser. And everything you need to relocate the control box is included. I just went ahead and covered the 3 wires here with a little bit of this protective sleeving. And while I was trying to get this winch wired up, I got hit by a pretty crazy storm here. And I'll go ahead and mute the music and just check out some of these clips that I got. This was crazy, and I promise you none of this is added sound effects. Yeah, I took a little break after that one. But after that storm passed, I was able to finish up the wiring. And I did end up finding these a guy makes online, and basically it just makes the control box on these Apex winches a lot smaller because the stock one is very bulky and unnecessary and just hard to find a place to mount it. So I've got one of these on the way, and I'll get everything switched over once it gets here. But for now, we'll go ahead and call the winch wiring complete. And then that will lead us into wiring up this Auxbeam control panel. And at first it seems a little complicated, but it's really not that bad at all. All we need is power and ground from the battery to the control board here, just going through that resettable fuse switch. And then we just need to run a key on power source to the board as well. And then we can run any accessory we want to, in this case the lights, straight to this board. The only other challenge with this is finding a good place to mount it, and I just kind of fabbed up this pretty easy bracket here and it worked out great. And inside the cab here, we just needed to find a good key on power source to run to this board. And after just taking a quick glance at the fuse diagram here, the cigarette lighter fuse should be a great spot. And right there you can see no power with the key off. And then once we turn the key over, you can see we get power at the fuse. Now all I needed to do was run the wire off of this, and that would be everything for this control panel. Now to move on to wiring up these lights. Earlier I just went ahead and removed the stock switch with the lights. And I just did that by cutting it out, and all we really needed to do now was run the power and ground to our Auxbeam control board. Right here you can see wires just kind of running everywhere, and this was just my dry fit before I went ahead and zip tied everything down. Just wanted to make sure it was all wired correctly and working. Now that I knew everything was working and correctly wired, it was time to run all this wiring neatly now. And I also needed to move the actual 6-gang switch controller over into the inside of the cab. And this is where that custom mount from Red Creations comes in play. And this thing basically just replaces one of these stock trim pieces up here around the sunroof controls and just gives you a spot to actually mount this. And it just looks a whole lot neater than, 3M taping this thing on the dash somewhere. And I'll also leave a link to his Etsy store down in the description. Really solid product and definitely makes everything look a lot neater. And once I actually had the controller mounted to this trim piece and had it up into place, it was really just a matter of running the wire all up under this trim and then down the A-pillar here, back out to the engine bay and to our switchboard. And right here you can finally see where I was able to meet these 2 wires up and finally connect everything. And while I was running the wiring for these switches, I was actually able to purge a lot of this old random wiring throughout this truck. If you watched the last episode, you remember that's what we spent majority of the time doing. And then after installing the rest of the trim pieces, I was able to actually put these stickers on our switches here. And then here's what our final product looks like with the switches mounted. And that actually completes our entire wiring list here. So that only leaves us with one thing to do now. And that is to showcase all the work we just did to this LX450.